All right, we are going to wrap up Unit 5 by putting together all of these different methods that we have used to solve quadratics. And we're going to look at what happens when the instructions don't say solve by factoring or solve by completing the square. We are going to look at when it just says solve. And how do we decide which method is the best one to use? There are several different methods that you can use. Some people just say, well, I'm just going to try factoring, and if that doesn't work, I'll do quadratic formula. But we're going to look at how we can actually mathematically decide which way is the best way. So, like I said, directions won't always tell you what method to use, so it's going to be up to you. And we looked at this in the last lesson about the discriminant. What was the discriminant? The discriminant was the part of the quadratic formula that's under the radical. So it's the b squared minus 4ac. And it's going to help us decide how to solve it. So we're going to find our discriminant of the quadratic, and we're going to say, okay, if it is a positive square number, anything can work. Factoring, graphing, completing the square quadratic formula. Because what happens when we have a positive square number? If we have a positive square number, we can we know that we're going to have two positive whole numbers for our answer, like x equals 7 and negative 2, for example. If we have a positive number, but it's non-square, like 8, probably it's going to be better to complete the square or quadratic formula, because if we try to graph it, it's going to have a decimal in the answer. We just won't be able to factor it either. And if its discriminant is 0, we can use factoring, graphing, completing the square or quadratic formula. If it's negative, that means that we're going to need to use either completing the square or quadratic formula. And as always, if there's no x term, it's just best to use square roots. So we are going to practice this for a couple of problems and see what we get. All right. In order to find the discriminant, what is the very first thing that I need to do with this problem? I need to get everything on the same side. So I'm going to move this 6x and the 11 to the other side. And it's going to equal 0. Now, I'm going to find the discriminant, b squared minus 4 times a times c. And this is going to give me 36 minus 44, which gives me a negative 8. All right, so because I got a negative number, I'm going to say that let's practice completing the square. We could use quadratic formula as well, but I'm going to use completing the square. Because it is a negative number. So I'm going to solve this using completing the square. I'm going to do b over 2 quantity squared, which would give me 3 squared, which is 9. Now I also have to subtract that 11 to the other side. So I'm going to get x squared minus 6x plus blank equals negative 11 plus blank. So I'm going to fill in a 9 right here and a 9 right here. And this is going to give me x minus 3 squared equals negative 2. I'm going to go to take the square root of both sides. I get x minus 3 equals plus or minus, and I can't really simplify 2 as a radical, but I can take an I out because of that radical. Plus or minus I radical 2. I'm going to add 3 to both sides. And that's going to give me x equals 3 plus or minus I radical 2. Now, quadratic formula also would have worked, but there are going to be times when you are required to use completing the square. And so I wanted you to see this and kind of refresh your memory, because it's probably the one people are least comfortable with. Some people might want to know when's the best time to use completing the square versus quadratic formula. I look at two things. I look at my a value and I look at my b value. My a value here is 1. So for completing the square, I look for a equal to 1, and I look for b is even. That is when it's going to be the easiest to solve using completing the square. However, any quadratic equation can be solved using completing the square. All right. What method would be best? So let's do our discriminant. Everything's on the same side already. When you solve for the discriminant, what do you get? And what method would you use to solve as a result? We get -4 squared. Sorry, that should be a minus. There we go. -4 times A times C. So this would give me 16 minus, this is going to give me 16. Actually, let's do this, -12, so that'd be plus 48. 16 plus 48 would give me 64. Since this is positive and a perfect square, I'm going to use factoring. Anytime factoring is an option, I kind of go toward that one. So to do factoring, I'm going to move the 4 over here, and I'm going to say I got x squared minus 4x minus 12. So I need to split up my x's. What multiplies to 12 and subtracts to 4? What are my two numbers here? Well, to multiply to 12, I could do 1 and 12, 2 and 6, or 3 and 4. I need two numbers that subtract to 4, so that's going to be 2 and 6. Same sign or different? This one goes with the bigger number. So it's going to look like this. But what do I have to do now? Now I need to go back and divide everything by 4. And when I simplify this, I get 1 and 2, 3 and 2. So I'm going to have 2x plus 1, 2x minus 3 equal to 0. Remember, to solve by factoring, I'm going to take each of those x coordinates, each of those factors, and I'm going to solve for x. So I'm going to get 2x plus 1 equals 0, and 2x minus 3 equals 0. This would give me 2x equals -1, and x equals -1/2. Add 3 to both sides. 2x equals 3, and then when I divide by 2, I would get x equals 3/2. So there you have it. Those would be my two answers. Oops, that did not work out the way I wanted it to. There we go. All right, so I'm not necessarily teaching you anything new today. I'm just kind of reviewing some of these previously known methods. But again, we're just looking at using the discriminant to decide which method we should use to solve a quadratic equation. Let me know if something here didn't make sense or if I need to clarify anything further.